Mike in Redondo Beach, California.
How you guys doing today? Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, we're all right.
Pretty good. Well, I've been better, but good enough.
Well, all right, man. I hope you get better quick. So basically, recently I've been on this kind of tangent with the debate between Matt and Cy. And, it's kind of frustrating listening to somebody like Cy speak. However, I just wanted to know your guys' perspective from the question, do you use your reason to justify your reason? Not that it proves or disproves anything, but just to hear your perspective in regards to actually if you think that's true or false and what that entirely means to the theist's argument.
Well, I think it's all just rhetorical smoke, for one thing. Presuppositional apologetics, like logical proofs, these are all approaches to apologetics. These are all arguments that have been constructed in the interest of attempting to convert atheists, basically.
Right.
There is.
I've never heard of that working, by the way.
Well, yeah, true.
I mean, I'm not even all that convinced that it's trying to convert atheists. I think from my perspective, the purpose of presuppositional apologetics is to throw so much pseudo-intellectual bullshit into the air that people who might have been questioning their faith will say, oh, listen, that guy sounds really smart, and this other guy doesn't really know what to say.
Yeah, it's the old if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS approach. And on the one hand, you can kind of look at these approaches that apologists take and say, okay, this shows that we, as maybe movement atheism or the increasing prominence of atheism has had at least an impact, because they're at least acknowledging, all right, we can't just give them the old sales pitch. We can't just say it's all about faith. We have to at least make a stab at defending and arguing for these beliefs intellectually, rationally, what have you. So in that regard, you can say, all right, you get a cookie for the effort. But I don't know any actual Christians, and I'm talking about Sunday go-to-meeting, in the pews, Bible-believing Christians who were ever converted to the faith by one of these arguments. I've never met one. I've never met a person who was a flat-out atheist or even just someone who's indifferent to religion, and then one day they heard the Kalam cosmological argument, or they heard a presuppositionalist approach and had this eureka moment, and they were like, well, indeed, God exists, and from then on they were in the pews every Sunday. I don't know of any actual examples of that. So when someone tries to come at me with one of these arguments, I usually just go, hang on. Why don't you tell me what you believe and why you believe it? What was it that converted you? If you're not if you were never a lifelong Christian, either if you were never a lifelong Christian, what was it that converted you specifically? And if you are a lifelong Christian, what is it that continues to keep you convinced? Just tell me what you believe and why you believe it. And then if their response is, well, if I told you wouldn't, my reasons for believing wouldn't convince you, then I would go on to say, all right, well, then why did they convince you? And then we get a whole discussion there. But at least it's a little bit more honest, I think.
Generally speaking, in spite of the proliferation of conversion stories, most people stay with the religion that they grew up in. Mm-hmm. Apologists have this problem, which is that sooner or later everybody runs into scientific reasoning, which has historically worked really, really well in terms of discovering things about the nature of the universe. And I think that apologetics has sort of bifurcated and gone two different directions in response to scientific credibility. One of them, which is basically scientific creationism, is an attempt to use the trappings of science, the sort of cargo cult science, like Richard Feynman described it, and dress up old school theology in a white lab coat and say, look, this is scientific. Isn't it amazing how the order of Genesis exactly matches what we now know about the way things came into existence in reality, which is total nonsense, by the way.
And that's going on a lot in Islam, too. You get a lot of arguments from
you do see a lot of that.
Islamic apologists who will claim that the Quran contains all of this advanced science that no one else knew at the time and wasn't discovered by the secular world until the 20th century or what have you.
Right.
And those usually crumble upon examination, but they're trying at the same time.
Yeah, but then they got this other faction, which has sort of observed the fact that, look, when we try to go toe-to-toe with science on its own terms, we lose. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to undermine the very concept of logical thinking and scientific reasoning, or we're going to basically claim credit for the concept of logical thinking in the first place. And so, we are no longer henceforth going to discuss any reasons why it makes sense to believe in God. Instead of doing that, we're going to say, well, why should I have a reason?
And that's the Psi approach.
That's what I think of presuppositional apologetics. And I think Daniel Dennett wrote about a similar approach in his book in the 90s, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, where he described like trying to dispose of reason as playing intellectual tennis without a net. And he said when something like that comes up, you should just say something like, well, that proves that your God is a ham sandwich wrapped in tinfoil. Because once reason is off the table, there's no basis for having a discussion with each other. And I think usually the presuppositional apologist will at some point circle back and try to claim that he owns reason and he really wanted to have a rational discussion at all. But I mean, I would just say something like, well, if you think that there's no basis there's no other basis for having reason than a God, and I still reject God, we're kind of stuck and there's no conversation to have right now.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree, and it's frustrating to listen to morons like that when they get put in a corner, and then they use this. Oh no, but God basically hardwired the idea of God inside your brain, and you're just suppressing it. And I actually find myself yelling at the screen like, you fucking moron.
Yeah, well, I actually think that is by design, because I think in addition to the arguments of presuppositional apologetics, I think the attitude is very much wrapped up in it, so that it's not an accident that Cy Ten Bruggencate is kind of a smug asshole, because his whole modus operandi is to make people uncomfortable and annoyed with him.
Yeah, and then once the whole approach, I think, is just to get the atheist to rage quit the argument, and at that point he'll claim victory. But it's just argument by assertion. I mean, and it's a sort of classic begging the question fallacy, where the point that you're actually trying to prove, or the thing that you're actually trying to prove, is presented as your foundational premise. Right? So it's like, well, reason. If you can't even. Since God is responsible for reason, you can't even use reason. The fact that you're using reason at all is itself proof for God. It's just it's an assertion, and they don't feel they have to support it, and then you just end up in this sort of rhetorical cul-de-sac with them. The more you try to get them to understand, no, you can't just assert things. This is what the whole process of argument is about. You make a statement, and then it must be supported rationally.
If you find yourself in an argument with a presuppositional apologist, I recommend using this phrase a lot. I reject your premise. And that's all you need to say, really, in a lot of cases, because if they're taking reason off the table, then they need to provide the terms of the discussion, and you can just respond to their childishness with your own by saying, nuh-uh.
Well, I you know what, you guys, thank you so much. I appreciate all that you do. I love your show. I watch you guys on YouTube all the time. And I hope you guys have a good New Year, and I look forward to your future shows. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for calling. We appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.